Hi, I'm Jennifer Janish, owner of Adored Salon and Adored Signature Hand-Tied Hair Extensions. I'm obsessed with curly hair. I cut it, style it, and extend it, and this podcast is all about my curly girl obsessions that stretch far beyond just curly hair. Hey you, it's me, Jennifer from Adored Salon, Adored Signature Hand-Tied Hair, and if you're listening here, the Curly Girls Obsessions podcast, which I love being on, and I'm so happy that I did this. For so long, um, I was told like not to do it because a podcast is not a lucrative thing and it doesn't deliver results. And the honest to God truth really is that I'm not even looking for this podcast to make me money. I enjoy it. I enjoy being on here, discussing things, interviewing people, talking with my team in front of you guys, because I like listening to other people's podcasts when I have time to. And usually I find a nugget of information that was motivational for me. And that's what I hope I deliver to you. So I have done this now for a, over a year and a half, maybe longer. And I think there's something like a little over 30 episodes. A side note, my AirPods are not working correctly. My puppy ate one of them, and now I went and got a second one. They're not syncing up, but whatever. It is what it is. So you're going to hear the background noise of my house, my dog walking around, the train, whatever. So we have a little over 30 episodes, I believe, in the Curly Girls Obsessions. And I went through and I looked at my most listened to and most watched episodes. And it's interesting because the most views are on, if I go from today's date backwards, right? So there was this episode called 100 pennies versus 4 quarters. And I related this analogy to the hair industry and how you charge for services and how it is that you would like to work. Would you like to work for, 100 pennies that create a dollar or 4 quarters that create a dollar? And I think that this episode got a lot of views because, first of all, everybody wants to know how to make more money and use their time valuably, right? And in the hair industry, 2024 was a pretty rough year for us as stylists. There was, we emerged from COVID and we were considered essential. Everybody couldn't get enough of us in 2021, 2022, 2023. Things started to calm down a bit, and the economy here in the US started to start to tank. And in 2024, if you were an independent stylist or a salon owner, you started understanding that the rising costs of goods that were needed in your salon to produce your services really rose. And if you're like, what is she talking about? For instance, a box of foils we use for highlights, Reynolds, I believe it's 411 or 711, and there's 500 sheets in there that we split in half, 1,000 sheets you get, right? That box pre-COVID used to be $9.99, and today that box is roughly $28. So it's gone up, it's tripled itself in price, and the cost of our services have not tripled. And that's only one thing out of the many that is utilized when doing a highlight service in the salon. So 2024, this is what salons experienced. And also, I think in general, everyone experienced a scarcity mindset with the upcoming election. Election years are hard in general. And this one was extremely hard, I believe, because of the I don't know if it was like lack of information or just too much information, right? That sounds like an oxymoron, but it's true. Like in certain areas, there wasn't enough information, and in others, there was too much. We were told that we weren't going into a recession, but many families felt it as if we were in a very deep recession. So that's where also the salon industry struggled. And if your salon was like mine and you did specialty cuts and hair extensions, it was even more different because if your cost point is higher than average and people consider you to be a luxury, it's a little bit harder to get in, right? Like it's a little bit harder to justify if things are tight. But with that being said, back to the 100 pennies versus 4 quarters. Consistently, I have found in my career, no matter what, people are going to get their hair done. And regardless, I would rather be specialized and I would be the 4 quarters person for $1 versus the 100 pennies any day. And so in that podcast, I discuss this and I give a lot of examples and I talk about where this benefit is to hairstylists because of my belief to create a niche and to understand how to provide services that are of a higher dollar amount. And it's going to serve you better because as hairstylists, we don't get health insurance. We don't really get benefits. And it's because it's a small business with a very high overhead. It just has always been that way. And it's going to continue to be that way. So hairstylists have to be very scrappy. They have to understand like how to make money, how to save money, and how to save money for the future in order to be able to live the life you want after you're done doing hair. Sorry, my dog is drinking his water. I'm sure you can hear it. But anyways, the next podcast that had the most downloads or listens to was my fear of public speaking, how I overcame public speaking. And I believe that this did well, number one, because I think a lot of people fear public speaking. And everybody is like, okay, well, how do you overcome that fear if, there's not like, if you're not forced to? I discuss like my childhood and I discuss speech class with my best friend, Mariah. She really got a kick out of that episode. And she was pretty horrible to me in speech class when we would be giving a speech. So my dog is driving me insane eating this food now. And so yeah, that one, I think because a lot of people struggle with that and it just resonated, right? So people shared it with friends, they, listened to it more than once. And then the other one that was of really high views was this one titled Hummingbirds and Eagles. And it's a story, again, about me in life having this experience and I think that the experience actually happened in 2019. It was pre-COVID and it's really and truly one of my favorite stories of my life. And um, it's just a really good, deep story. If you're looking for something that's kind of spiritual, kind of woo-woo, and it has a great outcome. And I talk about the fact that I feel like that situation is one that propelled me forward in life and afforded me a lot of things because it gave me this belief in something more than just what was, right? So those are the three top downloaded episodes of my career as a podcaster. And today, being that this is going to end up being the last podcast of the year, people are going to be looking to set goals in the new year, have a better new year. Like, people are going to be looking for that positive motivation. And I believe that I gave that in the speech that I did about overcoming your fears, because all of it relates back to this whole level of leveling up your life, right? So now on to this episode. I get a lot of emails about risk taking. And if you know me, you're like, well, that's not Jennifer. I don't drink. I don't really love to be like this party girl. I'm 49 years old. I have 4 kids. I have 2 dogs. I have 2 cats. I have a house, a husband, and I probably should have said my husband first. We were high school sweethearts, and yes, he is definitely the love of my life and my soulmate, and also has supported me through a lot of this risk taking. But when I, so when I talk about this topic, it gets really interesting because I remember one day getting ready to do one of my clients, and her name is Kim, and she had started coming to me when she graduated. She was about to graduate with her PhD. So she had 2 kids. She's like, oh my gosh, I'm so broke, but I really want to get this curly haircut. And I saved up for a long time to do this. And then over the course of probably like 4 or 5 years, I continued to do her hair. She graduated, she got her PhD. She was a psychologist, and we even used her services too when my kids were getting tested for ADHD, dyslexia. I have 2 kids that have both of those. And she was amazing, right? And so at this point in time, she herself worked for someone else. And one day I went to do her extensions, and she would toy around with these fun colors and stuff. And she sat in my chair and she was like, you know, I really want to talk to you. And I wonder if you would like mentor me on, how you started this business. Like, how did you take that leap of faith and decide that you were just going to do it? And I kind of looked at her like, I think I owned the salon at that time for 2 or 3 years. And I never saw it that way, right? Like, I just kind of saw it as something that had to be done. And she's like, I admire you so much for the fact that, like, when you want to do something, you just do it. And it sat with me because people had told me this in the past, and I just kind of brushed it off. And I'm like, well, like, if you want something, don't you just go after it? So then when I started the extension line, she said the same thing to me. She's like, oh my God, it's such a risk. Like, I can't believe you just did it. And I was, again, like, the extension line probably was one of the scariest things that I ever started, because it does have a lot of risk involved in it. And I was just like, I don't know, like, yeah, I'm nervous about it, but I didn't see it as being like this, at that time, this mountain to climb, or just so out of reach, because went through the proper channels, right? And figured out how to get things done. And you could find a podcast, I'm sure, that discusses like how I started that business. And it wasn't easy, but it really took a lot of persistence and due diligence to get that one off the ground. And probably one of the hardest businesses that I've ever done, because there's a lot of different roadblocks when you're dealing with a foreign country, purchasing a product, hoping that it's perfect. And yeah, that one's kind of put me through a ringer. And like when I sit back and I think about her comments, I can think like, oh yeah, maybe that was a little bit risky, right? And then the education. So when I started out with the education, I started out with virtual training. And I created that at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020 for the extension line. And it was like this first into the education world of people outside of my salon. So obviously within the salon, like you're mentoring, you're guiding as a salon owner, as a leader, the stylists that work in there. But also that was just kind of disjointed too. And I remember thinking when I started the salon, like, well, it's either sink or swim. So you better swim because this crew isn't looking for sinkers. And but now I've learned through the process of educating other people throughout the US and the world, like that whole program needed to be honed in. And I created like a training program for that. So I started with the online training for the extension line. And it was scary because I was on camera. Did I have snafus? Yes, I did have snafus during that. I didn't have like the perfect install, and I had tangles that I had to figure out how to fix. And definitely was a learning lesson. And the craziest thing is I finished recording that pre-COVID, so it was probably mid-February, and I waited until, gosh, I believe like the end of March to even start listening and editing it, because I just I don't know why that was one that I shied away from. Like, I don't know if you struggle with this, but you're like, okay, I know that I have to do that. And I don't want to be like strapped down by that because it's going to take me a long time. So I'm just going to put it off. And then it never goes away. And you know that you need to follow up with it. And by the time you follow up with it, you've created this big monster in your head of how hard it's going to be. And when you do it, usually it is that hard because you've put so many roadblocks in front of yourself, right? So to myself, right, I really do challenge myself when I start something. I like to finish it. I need to hit it off, like head it off right away. I need to have a deadline because I definitely do better with deadlines. And even right now, I'm working with this coach for education. I've talked about her before. Her name is Jody Brown. She's amazing. If you're looking for someone to help you through something, she is really good. And I said to her, like, this will only work if you give me deadlines. If you don't give me deadlines, this is going to drag out for a long time. And it's just me being busy with a lot of other things and making up excuses for myself. So we have that understanding. I do good with deadlines. And so I started out with that virtual training, and then I opened up the door for one-on-one training. And I feel like with the virtual training, we probably sold like 20, 22 of them. And then I shut it down because now we could be in person again. I opened up one-on-one training. I trained with from the course of 2022, because that's when I started at March of 2022. And we went through probably the end of 2023 with that. I probably trained over 30 stylists one-on-one in what I do with curly hand-tied hair extensions. And then it was time to open it up to group classes and travel. Again, this was totally stepping out of my comfort zone because one, right in front of people, I'm putting it out there, I'm hosting these classes. And, classes wouldn't sell out. Classes would just be sometimes the salon owner and one of the stylists who wanted to take it. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this going to look like on social media? All these educators sell out these massive classes. In my class, I have one person attending, but it had to start somewhere, right? And if I wouldn't have started there, I would never get to the point of what I want it to be, right? Because everything builds on everything. And again, it goes back to that risk taking and just like not being afraid of putting yourself out there, even if you might fail in front of many other people, right? And being that what I do is really different from a lot of social media feeds that you would see for hairstylists. My hair looks different. I've never walked into another room of hair extension artists and seen hair that looks like mine. I'm always the Lone Ranger, and that has a lot of benefit to it because people notice it because it's different. But it's also like one of those things that I just said, like if you're intimidated about being different, you're not going to step out of the box in order to train yourself in different methods that look different from what you're seeing on an oversaturated feed of Instagram of smoothed out hair with hot tool curls in it, right? Like that is believed to be the end all be all, not this curly hair, or at least in the minds of everyone styling that smoothed out curly hair or smoothed out hair with hot tool curls in it, right? Because they're following the mold, they're staying within it, and they're like, this is how I'm going to be super successful because this is how Mary is successful over there. She's got 1 million followers. She has smoothed out hair with barrel curls in it, and I'm going to be just like her. So when you're taking that risk and you're like, I'm willing to look different than everybody else in the room, I'm willing to educate on something that's different from what everybody else in the room is used to learning, you're going to know that you're going to take a back seat at the time because it just takes time to have people see it enough in order for them to understand the importance. Now, if you're me, I feel that the importance is, if you're going to install extensions, texture matching is just as important as color matching, because if you don't, the install is going to be off and it's going to stand out like a sore thumb, right? So that's my belief. And it's not just a belief, it's 100% true because I've worn straight extensions. And so with all of that being said, like, last year we did do 8 classes on that curl tour, and only one of them sold out, which I mean, it sold out. Like I was freaking amazed. I was so damn happy. So for the first year to have 8 classes, have one sell out, and understand the importance of that, that's huge. And I think too, when you're dealing with the dollar amount that my classes are, it's not like a $350 balayage class. Extension classes cost more, so therefore there's going to be less people. It also goes back to the 100 pennies versus 4 quarters analogy. It's only a few select people that are going to find the value in creating that niche, but it's also going to cost them in order to learn it and be hands-on in person, side by side with the educator, right? So it just is what it is. So wrapping that up, like, I was super happy with that. So now on to why I believe that I am comfortable taking those risks. So this is going to be a little bit about my childhood, and it is kind of like story time. Um, it's one of those things that I uh, only share with, you know, few select people in my life. It's not something that it's, don't get me wrong. I believe that I had a good childhood, but there was a lot of bumps in the road, as is for many people, right? Life is not perfect. Not everybody gets a trophy. And some of us have to work really hard in order to see that trophy, right? So, um, my I think if you listen to the very first podcast, who is Jennifer Janish, I briefly touch on the fact, like, my mom was a single mom. She was a young mom. I was born in August, and I think she turned 18 on December 29th. So, she was young. And my dad was also very young, and this was in the 70s when drugs and alcohol were raging and widely available. I mean, obviously, I know it's available now, but, like, they were allowed to drink, I think, at the age of 18. Like, it was really, um, one of those things that it was definitely not, it was overlooked, right? Like, all these kids were doing these drugs in the 70s, and a lot of their parents didn't know because the parenting styles, I think, were pretty oblivious, and there wasn't a lot of conversation about what the potential effects of this could do, right? So take a young man and drugs and alcohol and a baby, and obviously it's not going to be good. And even though him and my mom, they were married, they were divorced after 6 months. You would have thought maybe that would have been a wake up call for him, and it definitely wasn't. And so where this story is going is that he he wasn't a good person. And the last time that I saw him with my mom, my mom picked me up from a weekend with him, because by the state of Illinois, regardless of, you know, these laws always blow my mind. He had to be able to see me when I was young, and my and he didn't even pay child support either. So go figure, like, the laws are in the favor of the criminal then and now. Anyways, so my mom picked me up from this weekend with him, and he, like, without discussing all the things that went down right before the moment of truth that I'm about to talk about, um, she picked me up, and I was about to be 3 years old, and he was high on drugs, very high on drugs. And they had gotten into an argument which resulted, like, in physical violence. And then we left the apartment, we got in my mom's car, and he was following us. And he literally, like, uh he luckily he lived close to the police department, and my mom was driving down the main road to get to the police department. And while this was going on, he was, like, throwing stuff at her car. He was the windows ended up getting shattered, and she was like, "You need to get on the floor." And a lot of you are probably like, how in the hell do you remember this? Like, you're 2.5 years old. So when things are like really vivid, people don't forget them. They're like etched in their brain. And for so long, it was so shameful to me, right? Like, I was like, oh my God, I can't even believe that this scenario, and I'm not even to the end of telling the story, actually had happened to me. I never talked about it. It was kind of like locked away in behind a door with a deadbolt and 10,000 chain locks and probably two more deadbolts, right? Um, so if things happen around your kids and you think that they're just kids and that they're not going to remember, that's false. They will remember. And so she proceeded to drive into the police department parking lot. And again, this is in the early 19, or well, probably like 1977. Domestic violence was not recognized by the police department as like an arrestable offense. And so there was several times that this idiot should have been arrested and wasn't, right? So my mom pulls into the parking lot and it was cold out. It was winter. I remember like having on my winter coat, and she said to me, Jennifer, go run to that door and don't look back, and you beat on it until someone comes to the door, because if you stay here with me, there's a possibility that you might die. And I remember like looking at her and just knowing the fear between both of us over this person that was about to get out of his car. And the thing was too, like he probably really never wanted to hurt me, to say. And it was probably more, you know, thrown at my mom for whatever reason. But it's so interesting, like, people who act like that never really understand or realize the capacity of what they've done, right? So I remember running to the door of the police department and banging on it, banging, banging, banging. And they came to the door and they're like, in amazement, right? Like they're probably expecting to see someone at their eye level, and here's this baby like running 2.5 years old, telling them to help my mommy, who was in turn dealing with him. And it was the one time that they did finally arrest him, and he was put behind bars, and he, in order to get out of jail, had to sign away his custody rights of me. And if to know me, I would tell you, right, that was the best thing that he could have ever done for me, because he was not going to take me anywhere positive in life. He would have continued to be a brain suck and probably a total mind fuck for me. And so, I mean, obviously, even talking about it, I'm sure you can hear it in my voice. I'm sure you can see it. Like, it's kind of an uncomfortable thing. But I think relating back to the risk taking of the salon, the extension line, life, big things that I wanted to achieve, I do kind of think a lot of it goes back to that one moment in that parking lot, because statistically, I would not be a successful person, right? Statistically, right? I probably would be uh, a teenage mom, um, you know, following that same path, or just a lot of daddy issues and things not working out the way that I would want them to work out, right? Or I feel like too, a lot of the times there's a lot of conversation about the fact of like, oh, well, because they're from there, they can't do X, Y, or Z, or because they grew up here, they have these boundaries imposed on them, or because this was the thought process in their home, in result, they won't be able to do X, Y, or Z. I feel that that's totally wrong. And I feel like labeling people who come from situations that may have not been what is considered the American dream, like two married parents and a nice house, a white picket fence, two children, a dog, right? Like, I think that society thinks of those things and thinks that those people who grew up in that manner are the only people that are going to succeed, right? But the truth is really and truly is that people that have a little bit of dinge tend to succeed because the risks that they're taking in the future are so less risky than what they were in the past when they were growing up. And I really think that that is a lot of the reason why when I think I'm going to do something, I'm like, well, that mountain isn't that high. I can cross it. I can figure this out. It's going to take a lot of research. It's going to take a lot of persistence. It's going to take consistency. It's going to require me to step out of my box. It's going to require me to feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I think that's where I thrive. And I think going into 2025, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. There's going to be a lot of change next year. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to push you past your limits. But the one thing that you have to know is that who you are and what you are true to with your beliefs and what you're willing to do to get to the other side of that problem. And I'm sure you guys have heard this, like when a problem arises and it's something that's, it feels like it's life shattering, right? I want you to remember that story of that 2.5-year-old little girl. And I want you to think about the strength that it took, right, to run, to knock on that door to get her safety. I want you to think about how uncomfortable is it really to step outside of that box? Are you doing it because you're in fight or flight, or are you doing it because you want something more? And it might be that you reside in both, right? Like, definitely in that moment at 2.5, I was in fight or flight. But I also knew at 2.5 that I couldn't continue on in this life. And the only way to make that better was to get this help. I mean, I think I saw it in my mom's eyes in that very moment in that parking lot. I knew the fear I felt driving there with this crazy person following us. And I knew the day that my stepdad adopted me into his last name and was no longer my stepdad, things were going to get better. And if you listen to Who is Jennifer Janish, you're also going to hear a lot of things that got crazy after that too. But again, I just always have had this belief that no matter how hard the struggle, right? The first 90 seconds is the hardest. And that's what I was getting to before, is the statement that you are always going to hear. The first 60 seconds to 90 seconds is the hardest. It's just the realization of this scenario hitting you, right? And then your brain goes into motion in order to make these things work, right? It can either fail you or you can either succeed. And I've never had the mindset that I was going to fail. Of course, I failed, right? Like, failed drastically in certain areas. But I always figured out how to take from it the light that was given to me in order to cross the road or cross the bridge or cross the mountain in order to make it better. And I think that that is something that is going to carry us all very well into 2025 and through 2025 and just life in general, right? If you are thinking of the new year and your resolutions and the things that you want to do, put the risks at the top of the list because it is easier to overcome what feels the hardest first. And then the little pieces fall into place after the fact. And you just don't even realize that that's how it's happening. It just does. And if you make it your mindset and you start to believe this practice, it will just come natural. It will. It will just come natural. And something on a simple note, right? Like you need an answer to something. You're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to figure this out? How am I going to figure this out? And it seems like, oh my gosh, it's just so massive. First of all, the first place that you have benefit of going in today's world is Google. You could Google how to fix your problem any day. It'll tell you, right? Like it's going to be like, okay, this is what Google generated to solve this for you, right? And if Google's not enough and it takes personal action, and you really want this situation to be resolved, or you want this scenario to happen, you are going to have to do the work to make it happen. And sometimes it requires no boundaries, sometimes it requires no limits and working around the clock. That's called a season of hustle. In my life, there have been many, many seasons of hustle to get things done. And honestly, I say that word way too much. Honestly, when I'm in the season of hustle, life just flows. When I'm busy and I'm trying to achieve something, life just flows. I feel like when things are flowing and there is a lot on my plate, I tend to get more done. If I don't have a lot to do, nothing gets done. And just like I said about the deadlines. So going into 2025, thinking of the goals that you want for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, even 5 years, right? You are going to have to figure out how you're going to put one foot in front of the other to achieve those things. Definitely writing it down, definitely journaling. I could tell you every time that I feel like I need to get away and I just need to think, it usually means that I need to take the thoughts out of my head, use a pen and a piece of paper and physically write it out, right? Um, don't put it in your phone or write it out, scan it in your notes, and then let it be in your phone. But there is something to the fact of brain to finger to pen to paper of again, it's like the steps that you took to achieve that action. Every time I do this, every time I journal about something, it always comes true. And I don't know if it's because I put it on the paper, like I'm a true believer. If I say that I'm going to do something, it gets done. And, or is it just like that I took the time to actually think about it, that it got done? But I do believe that it's because I follow through with my word that it gets done. Um, so that's going to be my challenge for you in 2025 is going to be to sit down, write out your goals, and then at the end of the year, you got to reflect on it and see if it came true, right? So if you're a type of person who could only see a month out, 3 months out, write it out. Write it out. Discuss it with yourself and take the time really to think about what it is that you want to achieve. Now, this doesn't even have to be professionally, right? Like this could be personal. This could be your workout. This could be, I want to get a new dog. I want, I want new decor in my house. Like there's so many different things that this could be about. And honestly, I write out all those things along with the professional. And so it just helps. And going back to that client, Kim, um, I did give her some of this advice. I did. And guess what? And I'm not going to take responsibility for this because she definitely is responsible for her own, you know, her own life, her future, but she is a thriving practice on her own now. She did it. And I don't even know what it was that day that I said about risk taking or, how I started things. And maybe she didn't take anything away from me. Who even knows? I don't know. But she did it. She did it. She's a pretty amazing person. And she followed through. Followed through. So take away from this podcast what you will. I know it's probably deeper than a lot of things that I've talked about, but sharing my high school speech class was pretty hard too, because I know that sounds crazy to compare that to this situation of when I was 2.5 years old, but I can tell you that in speech class, I was in fight or flight for sure. And we all have been in fight or flight. We know how scary it is, regardless of what it is. And the object is to push past it. Fight or flight is an awesome thing. I'm going to tell you right now, anxiety, awesome thing. I mean, we may look at it like, oh God, I don't like feeling this, but it's the not liking of that feeling that propels you forward even faster. You have to feel it. You have to go through it in order to do better and be better, right? You have to take the risks. You have to understand the grunt work. You have to get out of your box of comfort. You have to understand that limitations are only what you set on yourself. And sometimes boundaries are to be broken through in order to get what you want. And whatever story it is that gets you there, etch it in your mind and let it push you through, because that's going to be your best friend. So happy 2025. I hope 2024 was good for you. Though it was a struggle in both of my businesses, well, actually all of them. I told you how the education went. It struggled. We did have the one sold out class. Fortunate for that. The salon still does have better numbers than it did the year before. And the extension line is going to be thriving in 2025. I can feel it. And for all different reasons, all different places that I'm going to put myself in uncomfortable situations in order to make things better for all of these things. And when it comes to my family, we're going to get away at the end of this year for some R&R, and I'm going to try and not to work. That's kind of almost impossible, but I do know that I will be journaling on what 2025 looks like for me and what it is that I want to achieve in 2025 with my family. That's definitely going to be taking more vacations with Brad, him and I, weekends alone. I'm already going to start planning the one for his birthday. I can't even believe that we're turning 50 this year. Like, that is such a shock to me. I I I feel like I'm 25. I definitely don't feel like I'm 50. Um, and then when it comes to business, it's approaching things differently this coming year. It's approaching things with a clear head. Um, and when it comes to the education, it's giving back even more than I gave this year, which is really what lights me up. I love teaching in other salons about curly extensions, and in my salon, Adored Salon, about curly extensions. So that's what's on my radar for 2025. I hope this podcast finds you well. I hope you have an amazing rest of your 2024, and I'll see you in 2025. If there's topics you would like me to talk about, drop an email to Jennifer@adoredhairextensions.com. I would love to hear from you. Follow me on social at Jennifer_Johnson_Janish. That is Instagram. The salon, Adored Salon. The hairline is adored_signature_hand tied_hair. On TikTok, I'm like the Chicago curly specialist, I believe. I don't spend a lot of time there. And so, yeah, I can't wait to see you in 2025. And I hope you got some value from this today. If you did, please leave me a review and a rating. I would love it. And send this podcast to someone who you know might like it too, and tell them to follow us. So, later.